increase the numbers, because now, if the IRS ignores a lien or levy, and we serve the abatement and the default, what is our remedy when they ignore the paperwork? Because the non-statutory abatement constitutes, with the default, res judicata, final judgment has been made, all the charges that you cited in your abatement are proven in law. That's all the evidence you need to go to small claims court personally against the IRS agent. Now, he's got to explain, first of all, why a criminal has not complied with the law. And then he's got to also prove that a real lien exists. The IRS doesn't have standing to create a real lien or levy, and only with your voluntary consent in ignorance do they ever seize anyone's problem. It was Judge Bork, remember the judge they didn't want on the Supreme Court? It was Judge Bork in his book that said 85 to 95% of all the people in jails volunteered for it because they didn't know any better, and neither did their lawyers, who are agents of the court. I always love that. How many of you have you ever seen a copy of Corpus Juris Secundum in there and looked up attorneys at law? And it says in there that the attorney's first responsibility is to function as an agent of the court, and his second responsibility is to enforce public morals. I've no idea what that means, but I know it has nothing to do with Christianity and the common law. It can't be. And then his third responsibility is to his mistress. And his fourth, the client comes in there third, I'm sorry. Now, in fact, you know, I guess in that's just a book anyway. In real circumstances, his mistress is probably third. His wife is somewhere down around sixth or seventh, you know. And his Mercedes-Benz is probably fourth. And the client is somewhere off in the distance there, who is only there for the fleecing. The point being, guys, is that when the persona has been separated by real lawful process from the flesh and blood, man or woman, the court now has an insurmountable problem. And so long as you don't re-enter the venue again, their venue, then that process will never be served on you again. Now, that's only because of one thing. Because we recognized the persona when we saw it, and because we knew the difference between fiction and real law, because they have nothing but fiction, and without your voluntary consent there is no jurisdiction established, as Judge Bork pointed out in his book. Remember that when you're dealing, or any time these people send you anything in the mail. I mean, what's the purpose of an IRS letter? Is it, huh? Well, yeah, to get your consent, you know, because you might just roll over, you know, and cough up the money without any further proceedings that could be costly, you know. And, yeah, but it also does one other thing. Huh? No. Yeah, but it also does one other thing, guys. Tells the IRS that if you respond with a letter, you don't know anything about law. Because letters have no force and effect in law. What they expect you to do, of course, is you get that letter, you know, and your hands are going like this, and you can't even read it, and you say, Martha June, hold my head still, I can't read, you know, and you get all nervous and everything else, and you start seeing your bank account go flying off down the river, and the next thing you knew, man, you're sitting there trying to write a letter, you know, with a hand that's really, Martha June, you're going to have to write the letter for me, because I can't, you know, get Junior on the computer over there and have him write the letter. You know, he'll write what I tell him to, and then you can't remember what your name is, you know. That's the kind of response they want, because you always make mistakes when you do that, you see. But the only response that we ever do anymore is immediately serve lawful process in response to an unlawful letter. served notice right from the get-go. They get the picture real quick. Now, I'll tell you what happened in California several times when they wouldn't pay any attention to the abatements. We simply had one friend of ours who took our abatement package and he served it and then served the default and everything else. And he went down to check a few days later and found out that the levy on his account was still in place. And so he said, I wonder. He took the abatement and the default, went down to small claims court and filed an action, and they served the process for you, by the way, all right, on the IRS agent. And within about 3 days, 72 hours after the IRS agent got the service of process from small claim court, lo and behold, the levy was gone. Just disappeared. The release came through the mail and all that whole 9 yards, you see. Because he figured that he could ignore it as long as you didn't have any further options. But not only do you have further options, but we have a package right now we're testing with 2 cases in California in which we bypass the small claims court and go straight to the superior court, which in Texas would be the district court. And there's no limit now on small claims damages. Now you can get real restitution. All we got to do, guys, is to get a dozen of those across the country to stick. And believe me, the morale problem that Al Adask and I were talking about earlier today in the IRS is going to suddenly go even lower and get even worse. Because these guys right now are having a lot of problems with some of this process that's being filed. And it's only because people really don't have any training in law that they haven't thought of themselves of filing subsequent process now using the abatement and default as proof that they ignored the law, and also that these 13 charges against the IRS here are true. Now, one of the pieces of process that we brought along here just recently, and it's in the new package here, is the non-statutory abatement of persona designata. More Latin. Whoa. You know, a persona designata is simply the person designated. Okay, that's all it is. And we file that. Now, we recommend that everyone file one of those, whether you've got an action against you by some court or not, because you make it a matter of public record long before any action is ever brought against you, and then you post the default in 3 places in the county. Or publish it in the newspaper if you want to. You've got the money. All right? The advantage is, pardon? The abatement of the persona designata. I think it's the very first abatement in the sample forms in the back of the non-statutory abatement package. The very first one. All right. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we're going to cover it in detail. Now, the point is, guys, that you got this big bad military power out there that has all the guns and all the power and everything else, and I'll have to be quite honest with you. There has to be some kind of an unwritten rule or law someplace that we have yet to find why it is they obey the law. Al?
I'll make you a bet because you asked the question before. You asked the question before about you don't understand why something about the connection. They won't. If you can make that separation between the fiction and the person, they don't go the real flesh and blood person. They don't go after the flesh and blood.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll bet you money it's a war crime. I'll bet you money that what you're doing with the rest of the novation, the Social Security number, you are an agent of the belligerent state. But if you don't have that tie to the belligerent state that they're fighting against, you're a civilian. It's I'll bet you the clue, if you're looking for this, I'd look into the Nuremberg war trials, and I'd look into the Geneva Conventions, and what happens to a man if he makes war. A military person goes ahead and shoots a civilian who's not a belligerent in a war. Does that make any sense?
That makes more sense to me than I care to deal with, Randy. Huh?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it all.
Well, what he was saying basically is the reason why they don't come after the flesh and blood man once you serve the abatement and it goes to default is because under the Nuremberg trials and it's probably a war crime to come after a civilian when